Building on the previous speakers, I don't want to sort of labour too much about the situation itself, but perhaps talk a little bit more about what it is we're doing, and also hopefully give you a better understanding of how the humanitarian system works, how we go about running these responses, and some of the challenges and complexities involved. And in the spirit of more give and less take, I'm not going to ask you for any money, but what I am going to ask you to do is to walk away today, perhaps with a view of encouraging people you know, both in the workplace and at home and in your communities, to get behind and support the efforts of agencies like Save the Children in East Africa, but more importantly, put pressure on your federal parliamentarians to ensure that Australia does more, and Australia puts more pressure on the global system at the moment. There is a UN appeal which is currently less than 50% funded to meet the needs, the desperate and urgent needs in this crisis. And the only way that that's going to be filled isn't necessarily going to be from your pockets or my pocket. It's going to be governments that need to fill that gap. The Australian government has been very generous so far in terms of their support, and certainly proportional to their size. But European governments and North American governments so far have done much less than we would normally expect them to do in a crisis of this magnitude. Certainly it brings back echoes of 1984. I think I was 10 years old, 8 years old in 1984 when the food crisis struck in Ethiopia and Eritrea. This crisis isn't as bad as that yet, but within the next few months it could well be worse. We, in the work that I do, we have a couple of triggers or indicators that we use to determine whether or not a situation regarding malnutrition has reached a crisis threshold. The first indicator we use is what we call global acute malnutrition. The emergency threshold for that is 15%. So what we're saying is 15% of the population has acute malnutrition. It doesn't mean they're going to die or get very sick, but it does mean that they are certainly at risk. The emergency threshold is 15%. In most of the places in which we're working, the actual indicators have got to in excess of 30%. So we're double the emergency indicator. The really scary statistic for me is what we call severe acute malnutrition. Now, the emergency threshold for that is 2%. In some parts of the worst affected areas in Somalia, that measurement has now reached in excess of 15% in children under the age of 5. What that means is that every week, thousands of kids die. What it means is, what's the size of the workforce for NAB? Is it 30,000? Okay. Assume that every NAB employee is 5 years old or under and lives in some of these badly affected areas. What that would mean is that over a 3-month period, 3,000 of your colleagues will be dead. This is the reality that we're facing. This is what we're trying to address. Okay, so this first image here is of Mohammed, who's 38 days old and he weighs 2.1 kilos. I've got 2 small children of my own, and I know that their birth weight was higher than that. Fortunately for Mohammed, he will probably survive, or probably will have survived, because he's getting treatment. And this is the difference between people who are living in the camps and people who are living outside of the camps, is that those who are inside the camps have a much higher chance of survival than the children and families who are outside the camps. And I have to re-emphasize, this is a question of survival for these families. This is Mackay, 40, and her child, Abraham, who's 2, and he's waiting to be weighed and measured. But what happens with a crisis like this is that we will actually take each child that we suspect of being malnourished, and as Matt described, there's a measurement that we do around the upper arm. We use what's called a MUAC strip, and basically it's a very, it costs about 2 cents each. It's a strip that you put around the child's arm, and it measures the circumference of the arm, and then that circumference needs to be within a particular range and indicates to us how badly malnourished that child is. Then what we also do is we measure the weight to height as well. So particularly with the smaller children, we'll literally put them in a basket or a harness, and we'll weigh them, and then we'll measure their height, and that again gives us an indication as to whether or not they're malnourished. One of what's happening with these children here is that they're waiting to be issued what we call, there's a nutritional paste that we issue. I'm not supposed to use the brand name, but the brand name that we use generally called Plumpy Nut. They own 98% of the market, but in terms of provision of this particular product, and so it's the same way as we use Hoover to describe a vacuum cleaner. We talk about Plumpy Nut. My nutritional colleagues will tell me off for using that term. But Plumpy Nut is basically, it's like peanut butter. It comes in a plastic sachet, squeeze that, very high calorific content, and that's used as a supplementary food. This is 7-year-old Abdali, and he has 2 brothers aged 12 and 9 and a 5-year-old sister. And one of the things we always try and do in these kinds of crises is actually capture children's voices as well. And what he said was that his worry is, in this drought, is a lack of milk and money. I worry when my mum doesn't have money. I don't think she has money today because she didn't cook the best meal today. I used to drink 1 cup of milk a day, and I don't take any now. I can't remember when I last had milk. Again, we have here Halima, who's 7 years old. Whoops, a daisy. Who's 7 years old, and they're both receiving what we call supplementary feeding. So again, the peanut paste, the Plumpy Nut, and what she says is, I wake up and go to school. I don't have anything to eat for breakfast, but sometimes I take black tea with no sugar. I don't know what we'll eat now when we're not at school. We sometimes have rice to eat at home on the days we're not at school. Rice we are given by the government. I'm really worried about the drought. If it continues, our school may run out of food and then I can't go to school. Again, this is why education in emergencies is so important for us. And my father may not be able to make any money. We used to eat well at home, but now we only eat rice. We used to eat pasta. Again, these are scenes that we shouldn't be seeing in 2011. For me, the crisis facing these children, these families, these communities is testament to the failure of our international system. It's the failure of governments and individuals like us to make sure that these kinds of events are not happening. There is no reason for people to be starving in the Horn of Africa today. And so what I'd ask you to do is to don't necessarily give us your money. I'm sure Sharon will say otherwise, but I don't want your money today. What I want is for you to remember the stories and the voices of these children and share them with your friends, your colleagues, your family, and ask them to do something about this. Because as much as I do the job that I do, I can't do it without your support, and I can't do it without the support of millions of others around the world. This is a crisis that isn't going to go away soon. It's going to be with us for months. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And we need to help others understand that we need to stay in this for the long haul. I've seen malnourished children in other countries. I was in Ivory Coast a few months ago, and it's not the kind of thing that I want to see, nor should I expect to see it in this day and age. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.